Welcome to the Podcast Answers podcast. If you have never joined us before, we help people start and grow their podcast, answering questions about podcasting along the way. And so, if you have any questions that you want answered, please comment right here in the video where you're watching, or go to podcastanswers.com/contact. And you can ask me a question about podcasting. I love talking about podcasting. That's why I started this podcast. And I love just being able to talk to people about that. So without further ado, let's get into our topic today, which is how to make money at your podcast. And what I'm going to say is going to sound a little bit controversial right now, but there is no money in podcasting. Yes, you can get paid, but if you do that, it's going to come later. Do it for fun now. Don't stress out about growing so big to get your sponsors. Start your podcast. Start it small. Even for me, this podcast started small, and I've been doing podcasts since 2007. And I just started this one, and it's still, I mean, it's growing, but it's definitely not numbers to get sponsors right now. So don't stress out about getting so big that you need to get sponsors. I mean, you're not Joe Rogan, right? I mean, even he was famous for something else first, as the famous Doc Rock said on the Flow podcast, Joe Rogan, you are not Joe Rogan. And he was even famous for something earlier before he did his Joe Rogan Experience podcast. So yes, there is money in podcasting, and we're going to talk about how you can make some money, but you're not going to get rich at podcasting, especially right out of the gate, especially as you start your podcast right now. You are not going to get rich at that. So first thing you need to come down and decide is, what is the point of your podcast? What is the purpose of your podcast? Is it to have fun? Is it to make money? Is it to drive people to buy your products? All of those things are good, and all of those things can be purposes for your podcast, and all of those purposes can be why you're podcasting. But you need to sit down and decide, what is the purpose of your podcast? And for me, it's a little bit of having fun. I love podcasting. I love being able to get out there and talk about the things that I love to talk about. And so for me, it's having fun. For me, it's hopefully at some point I can make money. I do release episodes of these a week early for everybody. And so you can become a Plus member, and do that in Apple Podcasts or in Buy Me a Coffee, and you can get those episodes that I make of this podcast early. And that makes me a little bit of money. It also, for me, the last thing that I'm hoping for is to drive people to buy my products. And while I don't actually have a product per se, I do help people along the way. I'm available for one-on-one consulting. That does come at a cost. So it is a product. And that's the goal of this podcast. Is one of the goals of this podcast is to help drive people towards my one-on-one podcast consulting, as well as, just giving away some free information, because I like giving my information away free. But I also know that some people aren't going to be the ones that sit down and listen to 100 podcast episodes or 100 YouTube videos. They're going to want to just ask somebody point blank, here's what I want to do. Can you help me do it? And I'm available for that. podcastanswers.com/contact. But you need to decide what the purpose of your podcast is. And so one of the things too, so then if you do decide you want to get sponsors, one thing to note that usually you have to have around 1,000 downloads per episode before you can even get ads from ad agencies. So a lot of podcast hosts are willing to add advertisements into your podcast, but usually the cost, you either need to have 1,000 downloads per episode, or the cost is based on 1,000 downloads per episode. And that's usually like $25 per, 25, 23, that's kind of the going rate right now per 1,000 download episodes. So you may not be making a lot of money off of your show unless you have tens of thousands of listeners, which you could. Just right at first, you're not going to have that. And so you don't expect to get ad agencies right at first. So, but there are some ways to go about getting some money and getting some sponsors for your show. one of the best things that you can do is do a trade. If you know of somebody who has like a business, but it doesn't have necessarily a budget, or they're a small business, but want to do some advertising, you can do a trade. You run an ad for them in their business, in your podcast, in exchange for some promotion in their business, for your podcast. So, for instance, you can go to your local barber or local whatever, somebody that you go to their shop, you experience their shop, you buy things from them, and see if they're willing to do a trade with you. That may be putting up a poster in their shop for your podcast in exchange for a 10-second ad, or this episode is sponsored by XYZ. That's probably one of the best ways, especially if you don't have a big marketing budget. They don't have a big marketing budget. And that's a good way to exchange and get some ads. If you have ads in your podcast, that's kind of proof of social proof, which basically means that people are going to hear ads in your podcast, and they're going to be more willing to invest in your podcast. Because if you don't have any podcasts with advertising in them, they're going to say, hey, how much is your podcast? How much do it cost me to advertise? How many other businesses, how much have they paid? Things like that. And you're going to say, I don't have any people that have paid. I don't have any podcast advertisers. And so if you can do the trade like this, that's going to help you, because you're going to be able to say, no, hey, look, this person's sponsored. They don't have to tell them it was a exchange for them. You can just say, no, this person was an advertiser on our podcast. The other thing that you can do is go to local businesses that you know and ask them to support you. This works especially well, again, if you know the people that are running the businesses. But even that, if you know people that have small, medium-sized businesses that are local to your area, you can go to them and say, hey, I have this podcast on whatever, and I think that you'd be a great fit, and here's why. Now, again, you're not going to want to maybe necessarily advertise they're not going to want to advertise with you if you're a completely different fit. Let's say you're talking about barbershop topics, and you go to a shop that sells bananas. They're probably not going to want to advertise with you. But if it's just a generic podcast, or a podcast that could be about any topics, it's really easy to go in. And I could even, with this podcast, go to someone local and say, hey, I'm trying to help people, especially local people, start podcasts. And I would love to get your business, and I would love to be able to advertise for you and your barbershop. And you can then get some more people coming in from that. People will hear it. And it doesn't have to be a very expensive ad slot. I mean, you can start making money, $5 a month, $10 a month, whatever you can make. And you can say, or per episode. So let's say you do 4 episodes a month and you're charging $5 an episode. That's $20 that you're making right there that you didn't have before. Now, it's not going to pay your mortgage, and podcasting for the most people isn't going to pay their mortgage, but it could allow them to invest in new equipment. It could allow them to have date money, to go on a date with their spouse or significant other. So those are a couple of different ways on how you can get sponsors to your show, and other ways that you can make money on your show that don't include sponsors and advertisements, or is what's called value for value. And this is something in the podcasting 2.0 ecosphere where people say, I'm willing to give you back this much value because I'm getting this much value out of your show. So, and that could come in, into the Buy Me a Coffee. I mean, that's what I'm doing essentially with Buy Me a Coffee. People are saying, people can say, I want to sponsor you. I do have levels per month that they can pay, but people can also go in there at buymeacoffee.com/podcast answers, and they can say, I want to sponsor, I want to give you support, $40 of support, or $100 of support, or $300 of support, whatever they think that my podcast is worth to them. They can go and give that money back to me. That's value for value. Again, they're getting value out of the content that you're producing with your podcast, and then they want to put it back in. They want to give that value back. And if you limit that to say you have to pay $5 a month, and then you get early episodes, which again, not a bad thing. I'm doing that, right? I'm doing that. But value for value in and of itself is not limited. You need to have a way for people to give however much they want. And so again, Buy Me a Coffee is good at that because yes, I do have levels, $5, whatever, a month or going up from there. But Buy Me a Coffee also allows you to say, I just want to spend $100 on this producer, on this content producer. And so you're not limiting it because it may be worth $100. Your episode may be worth $100 to them. You may have given them this huge, great idea. And if you're saying, you can come in here and just become a $5 a month sponsor, you're limiting it yourself. People will give you money for what they feel your show is worth. And value for value is not necessarily just money. That can include time, talent, or treasure. So people may give back to your show. They may, if they're great at artist, if they're an artist, a digital artist, they may create you digital art. And I've had that happen for my show, one of my shows that I've had before. Someone came in and said, hey, I'm an artist and I want to do some cover art. And they did. And to this day, there's a derivative of that artwork that's still on that podcast. And so people can come in with their talent because, they may be good at doing voiceovers. They may be good at creating something that you didn't even know you needed, and they want to give that back to you. Or they're also, people may have their time. They may volunteer to count your episodes or organize your episodes or something that necessarily is just something anyone can do, but they're willing to spend that time. They're willing to give their time back to you because they feel like what you have given them is a great deal. So don't count out value for value and like Boostergrams. And Boostergrams are something with streaming Satoshis. New podcast apps can do that, where they can, as they're listening, they can give small amounts of Satoshi back to you, Bitcoin back to you, as well as sending a message and boosting again, however much they want to get a message back to you. And I've seen it. Lots of people who have never had any engagement on their show, all of a sudden people are sending in multiple Boostergrams per week just because they want to get their content heard. They want to get their comment heard. And so they send these Boostergrams in and they're showing value. They're doing actually value for value in two different ways because they're not only giving their treasure to you, but they're also giving their time and commenting back to the show. They're actually giving you value to make for your show. So it's great because that system allows them to listen to something you said, whether they agree or not, give you money back, and then actually be part of the show again and give you more content to put on your show. Now, again, we talked about having to have lots of episodes. Don't stress out about the amount of people that are listening to your show. But if you do want to grow your show, some of the ways that you can do that are buying ads on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or wherever. Now you can limit those to a certain area, and that will give you some people. That'll get people to click like on your Facebook so they see more of your things. It may not be the best investment, but it does allow people to see you, and you can target those, and it's fairly cheap to do that. You can target those ads based on what you want. So you can say people who, for me, I could say people who like podcasts, people who are into digital producing things, people who are, I could limit it to people who are, 20 to 40 or, so I'm not getting people that are younger, like in high school if I wanted to. I mean, I do. I want to help people no matter what their age is, but you could limit that to be whatever you want it to. Now, some other ways to do this to get your promotion to increase your listeners and followers are getting business cards. Business cards are super cheap. I mean, you can get 100 business cards for $20 on Canva, and it's super simple to design a business card on Canva. I've done that, and so you can get 100 business cards for $20. Not a lot. And you can go around and put them in all your local shops. So, I've been in Jimmy John's, and there's a bulletin board in Jimmy John's, and there's a bulletin board in your local coffee shop, and there's a bulletin board in a lot of different places that people are exchanging their business cards. This is a great idea, especially to get people local to know your content. Now, again, that's not necessarily going to be global, but I've passed out business cards lots of different places. I've been driving and I pass out business cards when I go to a rest stop or wherever there's a place for me to put a business card. I go ahead and do that because it is something that people want to see. I mean, you never know where you might come up with new listeners at. And so you can put things on, some of the things that I like on the back of the business card is a QR code to either the website link or a specific episode. If you have an episode that has like a really huge guest on it, you can have a QR code that goes right to that episode. You can, you want to do that. You want to put a link on it to your website. You may want to put your cover art too, so people know what they're looking at. And it might be good to have like a play pause button around it, so it kind of looks like a iPod or a podcast player of some sort. And then your show description. So when they're looking at it, they're going to go, "Oh, that's the cover art for when I search for this podcast." So it's going to be your show name, your cover art, and a little bit of your description. And if your description is written right, people are going to know what your podcast is about. And then you may want to also put logos to some podcast apps like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, if you're doing video on YouTube, things like that, because that way when people see it, they know, oh, it's a podcast. And that's why I would also do something with like a play pause button around your cover art, just to kind of make it a little bit more descriptive that is a podcast and that is something that they can listen to. Now, one of the other ways that you can do this too, to help grow your show, is becoming a member of Facebook groups that deal with topics that you cover. Now, you have to be a little bit careful with this because you can't just go in and promote your content. Like, you can't become a group, join a group of podcast people, in my case, and just start promoting your content. Hey, I do this podcast episode. Come listen to my podcast. People are going to ban you from their podcast groups because they don't like spam. But one of the ways that you can do that is be helpful. Go in there, start answering people's questions, and this doesn't have to be on podcasts. I mean, just that's what I'm thinking of because this is a podcast app, a podcast about podcasting. But you can go in there and you can be super helpful, and just if people have questions about a product or something, just be super helpful about it. Be helpful, be helpful, be helpful, be helpful. And then maybe you have an episode on a specific topic that they're asking. So once you've established yourself as somebody who's helpful in that group, so you don't get kicked out right away, then maybe you can start like gently promoting things. And when I mean that, you can say things like, hey, this is a great question. Here's the answer to your question. But if you want to hear more about that, I have a full episode of a podcast about that and link directly to that episode. And that people are going to be more likely to let that go because you're not necessarily going to be self-promoting. I mean, yes, you are promoting your thing, but you're also being super helpful. You have a track record of being helpful in that group, and then you are going in and answering a specific question. You're not going to go in and just say randomly, hey, I have a podcast about podcasting, but you're answering a specific question in that group, and then maybe linking to your content, because you can say, hey, I've answered this question, but I have a better, a more fuller episode on that you can go out and listen to right away. So guys, I hope that you really find that helpful. If you did, go ahead and make sure you like and subscribe to our podcast. We're on all the podcast players as well as YouTube and a lot of social medias. So if you're on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, we're on all of those places. Just look us up. Podcast Answers is our name for almost everything besides Twitter. On Twitter, it's Podcast Answers 1, just because they didn't have that. But I hope that you find this episode super helpful. If you have any questions about this, again, I am available for one-on-one consulting, and I would love to answer your questions about podcasting. You can ask a question at podcastanswers.com/contact. And again, we'd love to get you in, and we'd love to answer your questions, as well as I'm available for one-on-one consulting and can help you personally do this thing. So thanks, guys. Have a great week.